Hey guys, Magna back here for some more Starcraft tutorials. Today we're going to be talking about defending cheese against Protoss. And I know Protoss is one of the most annoying races for cheese because they have a lot of different options. But really this is all on you to scout, to know how to react properly, and to push the advantage that you gain after stopping whatever cheese. Or maybe you might play out a longer, more equal game. But typically if they opened you up with the cheese and you made it into an equal game after that, you should have an advantage because they want to cheese you because they can't typically play a later game. So, yeah. Anyway, so we'll jump into the game here, and what we're going to see is Sue versus Zest. And over the course of these tutorials, you're going to see a lot of Sue because he's an amazing Zerg that teaches us a lot of things about how you want to play against all races. So, obviously the first thing you want to do is scout. If you can ever scout like a proxy going down or something, then that'll obviously signal cheese. So one thing that would be really diligent about, especially against Protoss, is drone scouting. And that's one of the stronger points of Sue. He drone scouts a lot. Even if not, there are also other ways that you can figure out what's going on, but I would really heavily recommend drone scouting because it gives you a lot of important information, whereas just not scouting definitely does not do that for you. Another thing that Sue does that really takes a risk here is he goes hatch first. Against Protoss, I would open up pool first basically every game. The hatch first, like I've always talked about, will net you basically one extra drone over the course of time. So it's not really that worth it. I would rather that you spend the extra 200 minerals on a drone, or rather on a pool, and then get your hatchery a little bit later. It's just not worth taking the kinds of risks that you might have to take in order to run this properly. But we're seeing Sue go for this. He does, of course, scout around with a drone here. You want to pull a drone down to try and scout around to see what's going on. More importantly, your second overlord needs to sit somewhere over your natural. And like we've talked about Sue a lot being really good in a lot of aspects, but this game he's just flat out taking risks that he shouldn't be taking. And Zest sees this. So Zest is just like, okay, I'll just start a cannon rush up here. And you need to find a way to deal with that. And if he knew this was a possibility, admittedly, this was a little new for its time. But once you see the more popular cannon rush spots, you need to be understanding of what those are doing and get on top of them sooner rather than later. In this circumstance, if you can't ever break these pylons before the cannons are done, which you won't be able to break through this if they get a wall down. So against cannon rush, honestly what I would do is I would just immediately cancel this and go take another base. Because this base is never going to be worth anything at this rate. And if the Protoss keeps making cannons and whatnot to contain you in, at least you'll have another base somewhere else where you can continue to macro. And this is how a lot of these games go, and I've seen a lot of these games be like, the Protoss starts to cannon rush the Zerg tries desperately to hold this base and loses it and then dies. The faster you're willing to push your advantage or push into something different, the better you're off you're going to be. So in this circumstance, your advantage is the fact that you can still get drones out on the map, and you can still take other bases somewhere else. So I would not get attached to holding onto this base whatsoever. Maybe don't cancel it right away to try and bait out more cannons from them, but you want to take another hatchery as soon as possible. So he knows there's no way he's going to be able to break this, and if he was a little bit more on top of what this probe was doing, maybe he'd be able to stop that. One trick you can do is if they're ever trying to cannon rush you, you can just block it with a drone. As far as where they would want to put their cannons normally, you can put them on patrol or whatever. Right now Zest is just waiting, and Sue should not keep this hatchery. It shouldn't do anything for him. And he keeps it anyway, so kind of some weird decisions here from Sue. But I think what he's trying to do, this is one way you can counteract a lot of cannon rushes. One thing he's trying to do is he's trying to get Zest to produce more cannons here, to get him committed to killing this hatchery, so that he doesn't have as much at home to defend against a counterattack from Sue. So Sue, putting down another hatchery on the map. This is kind of an unconventional way to deal with cannon rushes. Most of the time you'd want to try and pull drones and deal with it that way, but a lot of times that just won't be too much of an option. So in this circumstance it is definitely not that much of an option. So he's going to lose this base, but he's still producing units right now, and he's getting a Roach Warren up. And this was kind of a gamble. This was kind of a gamble as far as beating this. Most of the time I would prefer just taking extra hatcheries and just giving this one up and playing a longer game. It is annoying, but you can still play your way back from that, considering they had to invest more than the cost of a hatchery just to put these 3 buildings down. So it's really not that bad of a position that you'll be in. But this is a little bit of a risk just to counterattack and hope that they don't do anything back at home and kill them that way. By the way, this was from the GSL Finals. It's not like this is two scrubs going at it. This is like top of the world, top class players playing against one another. So this is definitely a viable option, but it is definitely a risk as well. So his option is just going to be to counterattack with roaches. This is all the importance of getting their hatchery out on the map, is so that you can have this forward reinforcement point. And he's going to get enough roaches up here. Zest really just doesn't make enough stuff and just kind of dies to this, so that's the whole idea behind this little counterattack. Honestly, Zest shouldn't have had this much trouble, especially if he was continuing to rescout here, which is why I say this is a little bit of a risk. But now he can start breaking down this wall. If he doesn't have any production, then he can't really win. He can take this a little more slowly. Zest has to pull probes here, and if he can ever get enough roaches and queens and whatnot, there's no way that Zest will be able to hold this off. And Su just has so much stuff here that he can just plow right through. So that, I mean, I guess that's one option here, is that if you get cheese in this matchup, you can immediately just counterattack and abuse the fact that they shouldn't have too many units back at home, but there also is the possibility that they hold this no problem. So this is a little bit of a risk, but I thought I'd show it as just a little bit of an option to respond to that. So this game ends in just a minute, considering there's nothing Zest can do. Yeah, GG. So he quits out of there. We have a few different varieties that I'm going to show throughout the course of this video, and I need to wait for this to load. There we go. So we talked about cannon rush. Most of the time you just need to prevent the cannon rush from going down by blocking with the drone. If it starts, then I would really recommend just taking a different hatchery and just moving away from the cannon rushes. And going pool first is going to prevent this so much more often than not. So this time we're going to see Yonghua versus Life. And this is a very different type of cheese. This is just a one base all in. It's not like a proxy, it's not a cannon rush. This is still possible, and I call this a cheese because this really shouldn't work if the Zerg does what they're supposed to against it. So Life is the Zerg that we're watching, so he's up here in the top right. And this is one of the harder maps to scout on, and I think this is what Yonghua is trying to abuse, because it's really hard for Zerg to see back in this area. And if Yonghua just goes for a one base attack, then he should be totally fine against this. Life is going to go double hatch before pool, which is pretty greedy. This is pretty over the top right now from Life. He takes the pool now, pretty late. And Yonghua is actually just going to go one base 4 gate, and this is something you don't see terribly often at the pro levels anyway. You might see it in your own games, but in this circumstance, if you ever can hold 2 bases with pretty much equal economy, if you can ever hold the 2 bases, which is going to be in this case this one and the back one, just go ahead and give this one up. If they're on 1 base and you're on 2, you're still in good shape. If you're on 3 base, you don't need to go overboard and trying to hold that against a 1 base play, because that's the way you could start to die. So Life needs to figure out what's going on here. He gets an Overlord in. I don't think he's seen a natural expansion. He's going to check around. And more importantly, now he sees the gateways morphing. This is 4 gateways on 1 base. This is a really big problem. And now he's starting spines back at home. He's going to be willing to give up the space because it's not going to do anything for him. And from this point out, he needs nothing but Zerglings on the field. Or roaches or whatever else kind of tech he has. This is also why, if you've watched any of my other videos, why I say to go for pool first, get your hatchery, and then get speed immediately, because speed will crush things like this if you have it out sooner rather than later. The whole importance here is just not dying and keeping a relatively even economic game. So it's 25 versus 20, and if he ever holds this, and if he ever pushes this away entirely, then Yonghua has to go back home. He has to wait for another Nexus to build before he can even start mining off his second base, and you're going to be in excellent shape if you don't die to this attack. So putting up more spines is Life. You can't really overreact. There really isn't a way to overreact to something like this. I'd say even a 3rd spine would not be a bad idea, and right as I say that, he puts it down. So all you need to do is just survive here. Use your spines, let your Zerglings try to attack the Stalkers the best they can. Like we've always talked about in holding these types of gateway compositions, you really need to kill the Stalkers and just avoid taking damage from the Zealots as much as you can. And if you're able to push this off, you're going to be in excellent shape. So Zerglings on top of the Stalkers is exactly what you want. A decent number of Queens, some Spine Crawlers, and if he just continues to produce nothing but units from here, there's no reason to produce drones unless you are confident that you're going to hold it, or unless he goes home, then you're going to be fine. And at this point, I would be confident if I were Life too, because he has to attack up this tiny ramp against 3 Spine Crawlers. There shouldn't be much more that Yonghua can do, and only because he was able to produce all those units and be able to get on top of this army, he should be totally fine. He also is counterattacking a little bit, but that's kind of a flimsy play. Most of the time Protoss should be able to hold that. And now the spines are up. These spines are very durable, especially with the extra queens here. This is something I want to highlight, is that you might not have enough larvae to get all the Zerglings out that you want. So with your extra money, just produce queens and be willing to transfuse your queens and your spines during the meantime. Notice that he just gave up the third hatchery. He doesn't care, because it's going to be 2 base against 1. And now that the second base is on the way, he can start pushing his creep down, he can start getting more units out and push this away. If he had Zergling speed, this army would get surrounded so fast and it would die immediately. So that's why I really want to stress Zergling speed. But now, if we look at the game state, there's a second base on the way for Yonghua. It's going to take forever to complete. And as soon as Life can push down here with his spine crawlers, he can take a third hatchery. He's going to be way ahead from this point. And this plays out into a longer game. But considering Life didn't die to that initial attack, Yonghua's plans are pretty much ruined. And Yonghua just kind of has to improvise and try to win from there. Obviously you do as well, but you will be at an advantage with an extra base up pretty much the entire time. And you have the units to do so. Even though you might not just crush the cheese, even if you just hold it and you can survive into a later stage of the game, that's good for you. It's kind of like if you were going to lose something but you managed to tie it and make it go on for longer. That's kind of an advantage for you because the other option would be losing, so that's the whole idea with that. That probably doesn't even make sense, but this game we're going to see Roro versus Stats, and this is going to be a different one from what we've seen before. This is going to be a proxy, and this is going to be really fast zealots being out right away. And this is yet another reason why you want to open up pool first. So Roro's down here at the bottom, obviously. Stats is the Protoss up here at the other side. And you can see the first probe coming out here for Stats. He's just going to proxy something. This is yet another reason why I'd really recommend a drone scout. Maybe your 11th drone that comes out of your hatchery is going to be the one you scout with. If you were to get in here and see absolutely nothing in his base, you would know immediately it's a proxy. I know what I need to do, and that is just not die to the proxy. So hopefully Roro goes pool first. I hope he doesn't make the mistake of not doing that. And here we go. Roro's drone scouting. So if his drone's going to get there in time to realize what's going on. He's going to come up here. He's going to see no buildings here. He's going to see no buildings here and be like, uh-oh, I'm getting cheesed right now, and I need to be able to make units to hold this off. So against the proxy gate, he realizes that there's nothing here. He knows it's a proxy now. He needs to take a pool immediately. Since he was going to go hatch first, this greedy Zerg. He needs to take a pool immediately, and he needs to be ready to defend this one base. If you're getting proxied, there's really not much of a way you can hold a second hatchery at this point. And they have to sacrifice a lot of workers back at home to make the proxy happen. So you really just want to be concerned about getting this one base held down. So the way you do that is you obviously get a pool first, and putting a spine crawler in the middle of your mineral line is going to be kind of a hallmark of holding this off. Any extra queens you can produce are going to be great, but the spine in the mineral line, the queens, and the production of 4 Zerglings is going to be what holds this attack. So right now you'll notice that Roro has a lot of minerals, and when his pool pops, he can just start to create whatever he needs to. He can start a queen, which he's done now. He starts Zerglings, which are on the way. He needs to start at least 1 spine, and you can go up to 2 if you really need to, but it being in the mineral line is a big part of this. If he had the pool done earlier, he might have been able to hold this off, but against a proxy you do need to be willing to fight with your drones a little bit. So he's pulling about a little over half of his drones. If you can ever surround this zealot, you can get to a point where the zealot has to choose a target, and when it starts targeting down a drone, you can click that drone and click it back to the mineral line so it stops taking damage from that zealot. So that's what he's trying to do here. Notice that the spine starts as well. He starts 2 spines, that's exactly what we're talking about. If he can surround one of these zealots, he'll be in great shape, and you just need to buy time for these spines to finish. Once these spines finish, there's not much the Protoss can do to break you now. So if you look at the drone counts, it's 14 to 11. Roro's still ahead because Stats had to cut a lot of workers to make this happen. And you'll see that he's just continuing to posture a little bit. He doesn't want to engage these zealots if he can possibly help it. He's just trying to make him waste time. So right now Stats realizes that Roro's done a good job of holding this, and he's going to start to progress into the next stage of this cheese here. But you need to know that you're not going to be able to venture out here very comfortably with these Zerglings. Just try to push this off eventually. You can start moving your spines down. You can micro your queens. You can see him being a little bit irritating with his queen right now, trying to deal some damage to these zealots. If the zealots start to run up, you can just run back to your spine. So this is eventually what Roro is going to start doing. Starts to move his spine down here. And Stats knows this. This is a really smart play. You won't see this too often, but Stats knows that he can't just run up there because it's not going to work. A lot of the times, if you get to the point where you put the spine crawler up and you get the queen out and zerglings out and whatnot, you'll have already held this the most of the time, because they'll just attack in there and they'll usually lose against the spine crawler. So the zerglings are now counterattacking, and this is another important aspect of this, is that if you can ever counterattack with any number of zerglings while they're still out on the map, then they have to produce stuff back at home. They have to produce a cannon, and notice how Stats is following this up with a pylon here on the low ground just to continue the contain right now. So any zerglings row can get out on the map and start pushing against Stats on other places. He's going to be in really good shape, and he always can fall back with his queens to his spine crawler, because this will hold off a lot if you control everything properly. So Stats is following up this this proxy with some cannons here on the low ground, and this is all just going to be about moving your spine crawler down and breaking that as efficiently as you can, while being irritating with your zerglings back on the other side, which I think they've since come home. Yeah, they're there. Starting up the cannons here. If you can stop these cannons from ever going up, you'll be in really good shape as well. So the queens and stuff starting to target this down. You notice Stats is being pretty smart with his zealots right now. But whatever, the queens are the most important part of holding this proxy, because the queens should never be attacked by the zealots if you micro properly. And again, you can always fall back to the spine here. So now it's a point of breaking this contain here. So all you really need to do is continue to push your creep out, and eventually if you get enough zerglings and stuff, you can just surround this and knock it down pretty easily. Of course, if you have the spine, you can walk forward with the spine first and transfuse it as it walks forward, so that the cannons and zealots and stuff all have to waste their damage on that while you move down the ramp. This is a pretty weird position to be in. We're going to see how Roro decides to break this. Starts to move his spine over just a little bit just to see if he can poke some of these zealots, and I don't think it's in range. Yeah, it's not. And in the meantime, you need to continue to make workers here. You need to also continue to scout. If you have the Overlord over the top of this base right here, then you can see if they try to take a Nexus. At which point you can start being really confident about breaking out of this, considering they won't have the money for more cannons and zealots and a Nexus at the same time. So realizing what's going on is a big important part of this. Notice he has his queens on hold position here on the ramp, and if he needs to, he can just walk these queens away back against the spine crawler. So he just continues to drop transfuses on these queens. And you'll see how durable these queens are. Now that this is starting to get hurt, he can walk it back. He does lose one, unfortunately. And he does bring his zerglings back and start to surround this. So this is what I mean. The Protoss can't do this. He can't just attack up here because it's not going to work. You should have too many tools back at home. You should have spine crawlers. You should have queens and stuff. They shouldn't be able to break that. Now Roro's starting a lair here. Of course, now this is the point where he can just walk his spine crawler down and tank the cannon shots and start to break this. So he loses his spine down within range of the cannons, just takes a few hits on that, and eventually he's going to break this because the Protoss just doesn't have enough to follow this up. So Zealot's starting to work on the spine a little bit. But you can see the spine does really well against those. So Roro's starting to break this. He does have the lair on the way though, and you can start doing stuff like one base lair if you absolutely need to, maybe for a Nidus. But once you've broken that, you can take your hatchery, and all of a sudden it's 2 hatch versus 1 Nexus. It's a fairly normal game. And of course, if you can ever break down this proxy over here, then he's going to be in terrible, terrible shape. This is another reason why I would recommend really fast Zergling speed, because if you had Zergling speed, if a Stalker were to come out of here, there's no way it'd be able to micro against you. So we're going to see him start to knock this down just a little bit, and if he gets it unpowered, then that's a great start. But if he had Zergling speed, he could just get on top of these Stalkers and just kill them outright. So this definitely isn't quite over yet. He needs to continue to be a little bit patient here and not just run out there with a whole bunch of stuff. But the fact that he has a lot of Zerglings on the field, he's going to have more queens. You can see 2 more queens producing at a time. He probably could have afforded to build another spine crawler, but he still knows that there's no Nexus here. As long as there's no Nexus, he doesn't need to be in a super big rush to get this hatchery down. Obviously, if he can get it down and finish it, that'll be a great advantage, but now he's trying to find a time to push this down here. There's only 4 Stalkers out. He has a lot of Zerglings. Once Zergling speed finishes, he can get all over these Stalkers, and there should be a whole lot that he can do. This is such a weird play here from Stats. He continues to reinforce his proxy with cannons. He's coming up here once again. This is a weird positioning game right now, but eventually Roro gets us into a normal game, and I want to continue to watch this so we can see how he breaks this. So just in case you guys get in this situation, you can see. There also, again, still is the option of just running by with these Zerglings. Since there's really not much back at home, there's 1 cannon back at home. He can't really afford to spend weapons back here because then he starts to get overrun at the front. And as long as you have enough queens, I would have really liked to see extra spine crawlers here. to help push this away so he could start pushing them forward. He could plant creep tumors and start moving his spines forward. And Stalkers and Zealots are terrible at breaking spines like we saw in the last game. But the counterattack is going to be huge here from Roro if he decides to do that. No, he's just going to surround with the Zerg, so interesting. What he's trying to do is he's trying to get these Stalkers so far forward and away from those cannons that he can just straight up engage it with his Zerglings. And he'll have to eat the spine crawler damage as well. So this is a weird game. This is a weird positional game here from both these players. And now if you can ever get the surround on this, you should do pretty well. The Zerglings aren't going to kill this outright, I don't think. But even still, if it's Stalkers versus Speedlings, that's a great advantage for you. And now, for all intents and purposes, this hatchery is up. This attack is pretty much held, but you don't ever want to stop taking this seriously until you actually defeat the proxy. Back at home, what option does Stats really have? He can't take a Nexus. If this proxy ever gets broken, then that's it, it's over. You can see Roro still trying to pick away at these cannons the best he can, and now that it's finished up, he can just back away. But more queens, more lings, more spines. That's the recipe for holding this off. And there's a lot of options that Roro has, and he's just going for the surround here. Doesn't want to get all blockaded on one side. So now that he's starting to engage here, the Zerglings should come up, and there we go. He can surround this pretty easily. And if, like I said, if he ever breaks this, this game's over. As long as you just keep producing units here and keep making the right decisions as far as when and where to engage, you should be totally fine. This will obviously take some practice to get used to, and we're just kind of waiting for Roro to break this. He eventually will. You can see him tanking with the spine crawlers again against the cannon. And now that this pylon's exposed, he can move his spines up here, start to poke down that pylon. If the pylon falls, this is over. So, really well played there out of Roro. Really doing well against that proxy and counterattacking immediately, considering he knows that stuff will be down here to try and take this Nexus. So, Roro played this out really, really well, and this is kind of what you're going to want to get yourself into as far as going against a proxy. I hope that at least gave you guys some good ideas and some good guidance on how to hold cheese against Protoss. So, yeah, I'll be back with more videos here pretty soon. And if you have any questions or anything, please post them down in the comments. There's also extra Zerg tutorials if you click the link down in the description. So, yeah, look out for that, and I'll see you guys later.